Council of the Baltic Sea States, and we are the lead partner on Promise, which since 2015 has been promoting the spread of the Barnahus model throughout Europe. Before I welcome today's speakers, I will very shortly say what a Barnahus is, why we are here, and set the stage for today's webinar. In case you are new here, the Barnahus, sometimes known as a children's house, is not a place where children go to stay. Rather, it is a child-friendly office where children go to tell about their abuse to many different people, but in a coordinated way. And they're doing this in an environment designed just for them and in a process that is designed to prevent traumatization and re-traumatization. And this is a process that feeds into criminal and welfare procedures. So what this means is that law enforcement, criminal justice, child protection services, medical professionals, and mental health professionals are cooperating under one roof, literally the same place, to provide rapid access to justice and care for child victims and witnesses of violence. We are now in the second phase of Promise. The first phase launched a European-level dialogue which explored the criteria for Barnahus in depth and developed standard-setting publications. In this second phase, Promise is supporting countries to develop their own national dialogues, agreements, capacity, and more. These webinars invite all interested professionals, wherever they are, to take part in the European Barnahus movement. This is a movement brought together by a burning desire to learn about the key principles, standards, and challenges to consider when opening and operating a multidisciplinary interagency collaboration for child victims and witnesses of violence. And we're so glad you could join us today. If you haven't heard about our exciting plans to establish an EU-based training center and to formalize the Promise network, be sure to check out our website for more information about that. And if you have any questions about the Barnahus model more generally, please don't hesitate to ask in the chat. We have knowledgeable colleagues on the call today who can answer your questions and share their experience with you. And of course, we especially encourage questions on the topic of today's webinar, therapeutic services at Barnahus. Before handing over to our speakers, you should know that a key common criteria of Barnahus is that psychological support, including short and long-term therapeutic services for trauma, should be available to the child and non-offending family members and caretakers. According to Barnahus Quality Standard number 6, there are 4 essential aspects to providing therapeutic services. Assessment and treatment is routine. The staff has specialized training. Children and their family or caregivers receive adequate information about treatments and also receive support to arrange such treatments. And there is a clear structure, organizational structure in place to provide crisis support interventions when needed. Research shows that effective treatment for the child, if needed, if needed, the offending family members and caregivers, this group of people getting treatment, can minimize negative social, emotional, and developmental effects of trauma on the child. And avoiding undue delay here is essential. So therapeutic and mental health services should be offered as soon as possible. You can read much more about these in the Barnahus Quality Standards. You have the links here on the screen to get to them. We have a long version, we've got a short version that's in an ebook, and also many translations. There's some other publications you should check out too at the link. And now it's time to welcome our speakers for the day. We have with us 2 speakers. Mr. Erlend Djup is a clinical psychologist from the Barnahus in Bergen, Norway. He has a special interest in trauma and is a certified EDMR therapist and has a long experience with both inpatient and outpatient clinical practice in different contexts. We also have Ms. Trude Lindø from Barnahus in Kristiansand, Norway. She is also EMDR certified and has a long experience with psychiatric outpatient clinic with children 0 to 18 years old with a wide spectrum of disorders connected to complex trauma and disassociation. We're so glad that you could both join us today, and we are eager to hear about your firsthand experiences and the impact of your work on results for children. So the floor is now yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm Erlend, and I can let you introduce yourself, Trude.
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Trude, and I'm with you from Barnahus in Kristiansand, in the southern part of Norway.
Yeah, we both work at Barnahus, which there are quite a few of in Norway, and we are here today to talk about clinical work at Barnahus, both our experience, but also we had some questions from Child Hub before, which they wanted us to attend to specifically. And I think one of the most important topics today is like considerations you should probably think about whatever step in the process you're in, whether legal, ethical, and other issues should be considered before planning how to implicate clinical work at your institution. So that's what we're going to discuss a bit, and I was just curious before we start to ask everyone what their view is about whether therapy should be offered at Barnahus or not. So I know you all have different situations, different parts in the process, but what do you think now? And then I'll ask again at the end just to see if anything might change. Okay? Unanimous. Yeah, good. So I think there's no doubt, like Shauna said before now, it's very important that the children get some help and that they get it quickly. And even though we can all agree on that, I think there are quite a few interesting topics to discuss about how and when and what can be challenging when you're working therapeutically in the context of Barnahus. And we will, of course, talk from our situation in Norway, which we know is quite unique, but we'll get back to that after a while. Okay.
Okay, so we tried to sort out what you guys actually wanted to hear about, and this is more or less an overview of what we are going to share with you today. All these items we could easily have a seminar on each item. It's huge, so I would suggest you take this as a little teaser, and we will take you through these items and share some experience. The first items is about the role of therapy as a part of multidisciplinary response. We will talk a bit about where is therapy delivered and exchange of information, experience with reference to other services and the child's involvement. And me and Alan, we just discussed that might have been some trouble with the translation because we have both been talking about reference and referrals. But okay, I think we will cover it both. So I just have to ask you to be patient with my little bad English and translation. The next is the role of the therapist in the multidisciplinary intervention. How is the role of therapists influenced by professionals and legal obligation code? The role of the counselor and the psychologist in collaboration with other services. And also we will talk about ethical issues, referral and long-term follow-up in Barnahus. And at the end, we would like to share some reflection on why is therapy an important part of the interdisciplinary work in Barnahus. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just give you a general idea about how the process is in a Norwegian Barnahus. I'm not quite sure how this is comparable to your other Barnahus, but this is how it looks here, because like we're getting back to later, we're a part of the police in Norway, so everything that goes through us is based on a police report. Okay, the only thing that the exception from that is the first thing you can see on this graph here, that is the consultations. So we do consultations by phone, and we have consultative teams that especially target the handicapped, like mental handicaps, or also the sexually harmful behavior. That are two topics that are getting special attention here. Other than that, everything else it has to be based on a police report. So when we get a police report, we have a consultative meeting and a forensic interview of the child, which is done here, but is performed by a specially trained police officer. And then there can be a number of outcomes of that, depending on what goes on in the interview. And after that, we come in with the screening and the assessment of the children. And just in general terms, there are kind of 4 different outcomes of the screening or assessments. And that's either that we decide there's no grounds for further contact, or that we decide to follow the children up at our Barnahus and we do the follow-up ourselves. They could also be followed up in primary health services, which there are quite a few of here in Norway, or in Bergen at least. It also varies geographically which services we can use, but that would, for example, be the child welfare authorities, health clinics, different kinds of nurses, psychologists. It could be a number of things, and for some of them we refer them to secondary care. By that I mean like specialized mental health services, which is kind of the next level of mental health help, which is also where, if we think that they will need long-term therapy, that would usually be where we refer the children afterwards. So this is just to give you a very brief and general picture of what we do here. We do a number of different things, and Shauna she mentioned a few of them before we started here, but the assessments are an important part, and this is the assessments here. This is kind of a broad term of assessment, because I think this starts before the child has even come to the Barnahus, but we'll get back to that a bit afterwards. For a number of the children and families, also crisis intervention will be necessary, either because of what the child has experienced, or just because of the intervention that the more acute forensic interviews are, where you get the child out of school, for example, without the parents knowing and everything, and need to help them after that as well. Interdisciplinary work is very important. We meet a lot of different institutions and people with different backgrounds throughout the whole process, also before the forensic interview, under and after. After the assessment, we often offer short-term therapies that can be also to the child, or to the parents, or to the child and parents together, or other combinations as well. Group therapy is also provided at some of the Barnahus, but that also varies geographically in Norway. In Bergen, for example, we have a principle that there is the offenders, they are not allowed to come to the Barnahus, but that is not a principle that is adhered to at all Barnahus. Some have a group for violent parents, for example, and trying to help them. So there is some variation from Barnahus to Barnahus, but this is kind of the general skeleton of what we offer. And like I said, the follow-up and the assessment starts before we get the background information, a lot of information from the police report, and the police actually do quite a big job in getting information from all the other institutions that might have been involved in the child's life before, or the parents or the families. So we have a lot of information from there. Also, before the forensic interview, we do the consultative meetings, the consultating meetings, where we meet a representative from the Barnahus with the police, the investigator, and also the forensic interviewer. We really want the children's welfare services to be present, especially in the cases where they know the child or family from before. And also the lawyers will be invited to be present. It varies how often they're there. And then we talk together we share information about the child, the situation, and try to also think not just how to prepare the forensic interview, but also what might this child and family need after the interview is done. So we start thinking about that already before the interview. And then the police investigator or the forensic interviewer contacts the children's trusted person who's following them to the forensic interview, gets some more information from them. That can often be, for example, a parent or a teacher or somebody working in kindergarten who knows the child quite well and has an up-to-date experience or whatever with the child. On the actual day of the forensic interview, we try to limit the number of people who see the child before the interview, perform the interview, observe it. We're always there for the whole interview, and then get information as well from the other participants who are there at the interview. After the interview is done, we generally go and meet the children and introduce ourselves and tell them about our services, that we can provide a follow-up session. Usually in Bergen at least, we try to invite them back after a week for one of the follow-up sessions where, among other things, the goal is to do a further psychological evaluation of what kind of help they need, if any. So, yeah, it's a number of different things we do actually to keep to make an assessment of the child and the child's situation. And it varies from case to case, so can't really go through them all. Okay, Trude?
Yeah, thank you. Talking about multidisciplinary work on follow-up and the main areas, it would be quite interesting to hear from other Barnahus in Norway what they would tell about this. I think I would like to mention that one of the factors that make the practice on doing follow-up and therapy in Barnahus in Norway is actually the geography of the country. We have a long coast. It's a long country, and it's filled of high mountains and valleys and islands, and especially up north, it will be quite a challenge to reach the Barnahus for many children. For example, they would need a helicopter or airplane. They would need to stay over the night at a hotel to be able to come to a forensic interview. And then we can imagine it's not so easy to plan for a follow-up. So we really need to rely on the multidisciplinary work out in the society. And I believe in general working with children, this is the nature of working with children, that we always reach out in the society where the children live their lives. It's seldom a very individual process. We are working together. But some of the main areas, it would of course be the consultating meeting, and I would say it is where it all begins when we start to plan a follow-up. It is where we can share the information and get a picture of this child that we are planning to receive at the forensic interview. What is the situation for the child? Are there disabilities? it's a good area to discuss these things. And also during the forensic interview day, we will get together with the child welfare, with other services that are represented to be at the house during the forensic interview. And important is also the support person that will supply with important information about the child, because this is often an adult that knows the child very well and can help to draw a picture of what is this child's situation in the school or in the kindergarten, and it will help us to prepare for the following up. So when we are finished with the forensic interview, this is what we would do to make a plan in cooperation. Who does what and when. And like in Bergen, you have this routine to invite them back after 1 week. This could be different routines. It is one of our standards in the Norwegian Barnahus that every child should be offered a follow-up session, but it doesn't mean that every child will need therapy. But every child should be seen and have this follow-up session. But also in the Barnahus, we are gathered as a multidisciplinary colleague of counselors, psychologists. We have medical team. We also have others. For example, here in Kristiansand, we have the forensic interviewers. They are employed at the Barnahus. They are located together with us. This could be different, like other places they would come from the police house to the Barnahus. So what is the point of offering follow-up session? What are the goals? Reflecting on this, we would mention to mitigate negative consequences of the forensic interview. I would say this is a vulnerable situation. Actually, a lot of things can go wrong, even if we work very hard to make sure that everything follows the plan. There might sometimes be things that we need to kind of repair and reduce negative consequences. It could be it could happen that maybe the police can't reach the parent, so the parent wouldn't get information about where is my child. Things like this we really don't want to happen, but of course this can make negative consequences, and then we need to be present and to work on it and repair it and make to help them go further. It is to help the child and family answer any unanswered questions, of course connected to a day with a forensic interview. There's a lot of questions coming up, and not all questions can be answered during the day, but also according maybe to be in a crisis, to be overwhelmed of the situation, we need to repeat the information to be sure that the children and the adults they get the important information. It also assesses the current level of symptoms and functioning, of course, and it is important to give the child a voice. Often we in this follow-up session, we can hear another story from the child that is different from what the child was telling in the forensic interview, according to what is troubling the child, and give the child a voice and be present and try to get what is the child's project and the trouble and the worries and how can we help. So it says need for care and level of care and prevent future negative effects of adverse experience. Yeah, and prevent future negative experience. Yeah, we are very ambitious. Yeah, can see that. Erlend.
To a question here, but I'll get back to it later on. Guidelines for screening and assessment. This is something that we have worked a bit with in the Bergen, because we know that it's the same as in therapy elsewhere, that if you just use the clinician's subjective impression as regards to whether the child is in need of therapy or what kind of therapy or follow-up the child needs, then we know that it's, even though clinicians are very self-confident about the ability to judge, it's better to use actually some standardized tests that have that are validated and have good psychometric properties. And our goal, at least here in Bergen now, is to increase the number of assessments that are done with the children so that we can secure that we actually do identify the children who are in need of help, and that we can get them to the right level of care as soon as possible. So that's one of the things that are important to us. But we see that as in some cases, of course, the children won't disclose abuse, even though you can have a feeling that it's probably being abused. And then sometimes the child will then be sent back to the abuser if the abuser is a parent, and abusers rarely give their consent to sending the children to the Barnahus for any form of follow-up, and also kind of the premise for follow-up. If you cannot say that there's legal grounds to take action, then what's the premise for therapy? And of course, this is it's kind of a minefield to operate in. So we try to maneuver this and see that this is a group of children that kind of often will slip a bit through our fingers. So if we can also have, we're trying to get some form of electronic assessment so that they can go online, or that we have like a tablet or an iPad of sorts that they can use and fill it out, then the level, it's easier for them to actually do the assessment, and also for us to identify any symptoms or drops in functioning that might justify a therapeutic response of sorts, even though there's not really any legal grounds to take action against anyone. So several good reasons, I think, to use electronic assessment. It's also the platform that a lot of the children are most used to, and yeah, it's kind of a lower introductory level for them to talk about how they are. We also argue in Bergen, at least, just talking for myself now, that the psychological assessments should be used more often by the police as a form of documentation of injuries, because they do routinely use medical and odontological records and reports to say something about the injuries that the child has. Well, the causality is, of course, a problem here, as it would be in the psychological assessments, but that they can be used, at least if you have standardized and good psychometric assessments, then you can also use that in the investigation. So that's something that I've been trying to talk to the police about, trying to change the kind of the general attitude towards this. Okay, Trude?
Yeah, Erlend, I would just like to comment on one thing on this slide. It's one thing we experienced that we should worry about during the screening. For example, according to emotional or traumatic stress, we do see that we disclose the risk for suicide at children down to, we do some screening on children down to 9-10 years, and we often see this risk, and we are concerned about what about the toddlers, the small one, and reflection would be how can we develop assessment that can where we can get more knowledge about the toddlers, the smallest one that come to us according to risk for sorry, I can't find a word, but the risk for taking suicide and to have these thoughts. So how is the role of therapists influenced by professional and legal obligation code? Well, we, as we understand it, we see that the Norwegian Barnahus, we are organized as a branch within the police under the Department of Justice, and according to this, we are a bit different. Where other countries, the Barnahus are organized within branches of social services. And this formal organization affects the premises for providing therapy in Barnahus. This is according to, because we are organized in Department of Justice and Police, laws regulating healthcare services and law of patient rights, it will not apply to therapy in Barnahus, but still we do therapy in Barnahus. So Barnahus in Norway is a part of the police and not part of a healthcare institution, and that makes an implication. It can affect regulation. According to transport, you need, for example, you would need law to regulate how to take a child out from the kindergarten, put it in a car, and take it to Barnahus. It would be dilemmas like access to journal. Actually, we don't have a journal system like they would have in hospital, and not a law that regulates how to do a journal, and we don't have any law that regulates the patient's right to complain and the patient's rights. So yes, and then we have these differences that because psychologists must adhere to the law of the health personnel, and other counselors don't do that. Yeah. So in the development of the Norwegian Barnahus, actually in the beginning, the police and the justice, the Department of Justice didn't want the Barnahus to do therapy in the house of the police, but along the process, of course, there was an experience that it was needed to have some support and have a system around the children that came in for forensic interviews. So I would say today we are kind of we are doing this, but there is no law that regulates this, and this is now what we are longing for, a Barnahus legislation that would put things more in system and make also our rule more clear, and also presumably reduce differences between Barnahus. Yeah, Erlend.
Sorry, Erlend, you need to put microphone on.
Muted my microphone. But yeah, the ethical issues, this is a very big topic that is very important, and we don't really have the time to deep dive into it, but I think it's very interesting and something that should be considered closely wherever you're working. But like Trude was talking about now, there's no law regulating Barnahus practice, and for me as a health personnel, it's very strange to work somewhere where my practice is in such a to such a low extent actually regulated, and patient rights are not very well protected. But anyway, the ethical guidelines also come under pressure when the law doesn't really regulate what you do as much. So if you sit, for example, in a forensic interview and you can say as a representative for the Barnahus that this child seems to be exhausted, or I think they need a break, or I think actually we should finish off for today, then do they take that into consideration or not? And I mean, it's not because the lawyer is the one who actually decides whether to continue or not, so they can choose to take our comments into account, and they can choose not to. And if we feel that they're doing something that we do not ourselves think is right to do, I mean, to continue an interview after you can see that the child is clearly exhausted or something like that, you're kind of by staying there and sitting in the room and just continuing to facilitate this, you're kind of making yourself an accomplice, not to breaking the law, of course, but maybe to breaking some professional or ethical principles that you have. So this can be challenging. And I think just the role as a therapist as well, we do it in such different ways. Different professions do it in different ways. We have different responsibilities, different ideas about what therapy is and should be. And yeah, I think that's also can be a problem. To a certain extent, it seems that whether you get a psychologist or a family therapist or any other profession that works as a counselor at the Barnahus, it seems like that may be an important factor in deciding what kind of therapy and follow-up you get after the interview is over, which is not a very good way of providing resources. I mean, it should be more predictable and standardized, I guess, in some way. And also the role as the therapist is not really a role that the police are they don't really focus very much on that. They mostly focus on the work we do as guiding and counseling during the interviews. That's kind of the main job from their perspective, while the therapy thing is kind of something else and something that we have on our side. I'm just trying to mind the time as well here. But the two-way confidentiality is and this is a thing that I've been working with in my own mind, because I went from like being part of the forensic interview to following the child, and then the police will give me information about the child's case, and then in the therapy with the child doesn't know that I have this information about the case, and maybe the police say that I'm not allowed to disclose this information to the child at this point in time, and then sitting there as a therapist knowing more than the child knows about their own case or life or situation it's kind of a difficult thing to manage. And how does that affect the therapeutic process? From a psychological point of view, it's difficult to imagine that it has no effect on my conductance in the interview or in the therapeutic situation. And also sometimes I know that the child, for example, has to come for a second forensic interview, where the point is not maybe so much to ask the child questions, but more to inform the child of developments in their case. And sometimes the developments can be quite shocking, and knowing this and knowing that I'm trying to help the child with the situation here and now, but at some point in the future they're going to get some information from the police that is going to make everything change again. And is that okay? And what parts do you play in that? Sometimes the police will ask if I can inform the child for them, as I have a therapeutic relation, and will want me to use the therapeutic relationship to communicate to the child. Is that okay to do? How does that affect the therapeutic relationship? I think it's very complicated, and I spend a lot of time thinking about these things. And of course, we have to consider, this is more like the ethical part of therapy, I think. We have to consider the contextual awareness, the problem of causality. This is a very, very strange situation for the child. So any observations we do, any assessments we do, we have to be mindful of the fact that they're done at a very specific a point in time. There's a crisis in the child's system. They're feeling maybe unprepared, lack of control. The fact that they're talking to the police, how does that affect your observations? And of course, we as therapists are also prone to see what we want to see, like the confirmation bias. If we are looking for trauma symptoms, then we might possibly just find that the trauma symptoms are there. So we have to also consider that we have to keep an open mind, of course. You'll see what you're looking for in most cases. And we have to be very, very careful to remember what we're not looking at. I mean, we do check like trauma symptoms and that kind of thing, but we do not do a full anamnestic interview. So usually we will not have enough information about things we know are very important in somatic and mental health, like developmental factors in the child's life, prenatal experiences, genetics, environmental factors, and so on. All these things are very important, but usually we don't have very extensive knowledge, and since there are no, we're not part of the healthcare system, and there's no legislation regulating, and we don't have a proper journal system, I think it's maybe not a very good idea to do a really big research job trying to collect all this information here at the Barnahus when it kind of belongs in the healthcare system. So that's also something to consider. Yeah, Trude.
Yeah. Yes, and on top of all this, we are organized within the police, so we have to ask, how are we perceived by others? In comparison, how would it be to come to a follow-up to a therapeutic session in a service connected to social service or not the police? Like we can imagine the police would be kind of an authority in the society, and how does it affect what we offer? I think I would just I see time is running out, so we would just working side by side, the police and lawyers and psychologists and counselor, we really need to know our role very well. We have to know what do the police expect of us, and how does it relate to other responsibilities. And this is something I think we are always we need to be aware of and work on, not to make any kind of conflicts across the therapeutic field and the police and the justice. Okay, where therapy is delivered. Therapy, yes, it is a broad term, and the majority of therapy is done outside the Barnahus, and also offered at the Barnahus. Erlend has already spoken about what service could be. I think it can be a bit confusing for some people that some Barnahus offer therapy and maybe others do it less. So this is also something we would like to. I hope we would see was more systematic if the Barnahus had its own law. Mm-hmm. experience with, again, reference. I think we were actually talking about referrals, but I think it covered both. We think that Barnahus can be in a good position to assess the child's need for help. We, through the forensic interview, we often got the child's own description on his or her situation, and that can be an important start for the further assessment to make a further plan. Yeah. I wonder, Erlend, would we just go further to the summary, because I think
we need to leave some time for questions as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just do a summary of some of the bullet points here. Just to you, Trude, there's a question in the chat about Barnahus in relation to hospitals. Maybe you can look at that while I'm talking, going through the summary. But anyway, why is therapy an important part of the interdisciplinary work in Barnahus? We know, of course, everyone knows that there's a very strong relationship between childhood sexual abuse or violence and health risk behavior and death in adulthood. It has very big and serious implications for the children. So I think it's important to use the information you get at Barnahus during the forensic interview. The child will, in many cases, put into their own words how the experience has been for them, and to use that as a stepping stone towards therapy is, in many accounts, a very good thing. I mean, just coming to the same person that's heard the story already, talking with them so they don't have to go through the story again with someone else, with someone new. We know this is very challenging for the children to talk about these experiences. So that's it's good, and also we can also help the children translate their experiences to the court as witnesses in the court. So that's another benefit. We have quite a bit of experience with being in court, talking to lawyers, working with lawyers, and kind of translating mental health into legal terms, that kind of thing. So I think it's also good that we can use that competence. Where it's also important, I think, that we actually address the issue of the topics that the legal system is not all that interested in. So like emotional violence, like neglect or bullying from parent to child. It's not as common for the lawyers or the police to be interested in that, but it can be just as harmful. And I think we have an important role in educating the system as well about these things. The interdisciplinary work is very important. I think it's important that the adults take responsibility for this and actually just make sure that there are meetings between all the involved parts. I mean, some of these people are going from place to place, and the intention with the Barnahus is to collect everything under one roof. So I think it's also important to remember that we can do that, and it's not without its challenges, especially with confidentiality, for example, from therapists to others. I mean, what information do people need to be able to help the child, and what is protected by, for example, the patient-doctor confidentiality. But the Change Factory, which is a bunch of children in Norway who have been through the system, who are now a group of people who collect experiences and try to make reports based on the children's experiences, have now made a report about Barnahus, the children who have been here. And their feedback is very important to us, and some of it we can, of course, adhere to. Other things are more difficult, but they say that it's very important that the Barnahus have a follow-up after the forensic interview, because they have a lot of questions, reactions, not just to the premise for the contact with the police in Barnahus, but also of the experience itself of being here. And we also have a government report in Norway, which is roughly translated Failure and Betrayal, which has looked at how the public system helps children in very fragile situations. And they conclude that Barnahus has a very important role in actually identifying the children that, I'm not sure if this is even an expression in English, but falling between two chairs in Norwegian, so they don't really fit either here or there in the system otherwise. But since they're here, somebody sees them, somebody identifies their need for a problem, for some help, that they have a problem. And we can either help them ourselves or we can point them in the right direction. So I think that sums it up. So just in the end, I'll try to do the poll one more time and see if anything has changed. Do you think Barnahus should offer therapy? Do it quickly. Looks like, yeah, still of the same mind. Yeah, good. Because, I mean, the point with our presentation here is not that it's not a good idea with therapy, but there are quite a number of things to think about when you're making a Barnahus, the legislative issues, the ethical issues. I think it's very important to be mindful of both role conflicts, of all these dilemmas that pop up here and there and everywhere. Almost every day I'm in a new situation which I've never been in before, and I'm not quite sure how to manage it because there are so many things to take into consideration. So it's, like I said, kind of a minefield, but very important, I think, that the children have a chance to also come to therapy here with us. So thank you for listening. I hope there was something you can take back and discuss at your respective workplace.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you. It was indeed very interesting, and I think what you said at the end about all of the considerations that people who are advocating for and working to launch Barnahus in their countries. I think one key consideration maybe is how to recruit dedicated and specialized experts like yourself, and also to keep them. Maybe if you could say just a little bit about what drew you to the job, what keeps you there, and what sort of support that you get so that you don't burn out, for example.
Do you want to start, Trude?
Okay. Yeah, I guess again it might be different answers from different Barnahus, but the attraction for this to work here was absolutely the field of violence and traumatic stress, which it's what I'm educated in. But when I'm here, it is very much on my own as a therapist. I must say that because it is connected to the lack of this laws of regulating healthcare services and everything, that it doesn't automatically happen that you get the support. We are not the system. We are not a part of the, for example, the university or the hospital. So sometimes it can be a bit frustrating, I have to admit. So it's important to have good colleagues and be out there and be aware what is going on the field and bring it home. Yeah.
I think for my part, the interest is, obviously it's a very important topic, and I've worked a bit in adult healthcare and seen what can be the consequences of childhood abuse and neglect further down the line, and I think it's at least a more optimistic approach to be in the early phases of this and try to prevent damage rather than trying to fix it later on, because it's a big job trying to fix these things, and it's better to try to prevent it. So, but also I think to keep people, because we've seen for psychologists in particular that there's been quite a big change of psychologists in the Norwegian Barnahus, and I think it has, among other things, something to do with the lack of legislation and regulation of something that's, I think, very important to regulate. So the patient rights are also protected here, not just in the healthcare system, as there's a lot of overlap between what happens here and happens in the healthcare system. And it's not very satisfying from a professional point of view to be improvising with journals and that kind of thing. So you have to make the framework for working there good enough so you can feel that you're still maintaining your professional ethics and professionalism in general, I think. So I think the flexibility is good, but it has its drawbacks as well. But I think also, like Trude is talking about, that the connection, we're trying to make a collaboration with the university here in Bergen, so that we can do some research as well, because I think the Barnahus have a really unique position and have access to a very interesting and important group of both children and adults that can give us some more information about what is good for who and how and where and when should it be done. So there's still a lot of learning to do.
And I would also like to mention that because of maybe because of we don't have this opportunity to work as much with therapy and follow-up as we would as we wish. I experienced that it also can affect the preventing work that Erlend is talking about, because it puts a limit on how much we are able to do. So I think it is important for the future that this will be clarified, what will be the role of the therapist and the counselor and the psychologist at Barnahus.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. We'd be very interested to hear more about your university collaboration sometime with this research and what you have planned. We have some similar plans in Promise, actually, to start collecting some comparable European data on violence against children for those who are visiting or even having consultations at the Barnahus. So maybe we could share some thoughts about how that will be going. But I want to thank you both so much for joining us today for this very interesting overview of your work and of the challenges that you face. And we're really glad to have you as part of our Promise family. For everyone who's still on the call, I just want to say that this was a presentation from clinical psychologists who are working in Barnahus, where the interviews are actually happening from the police, and they're sitting under they're being led by the police. And then the second part of this webinar next week will actually be from a psychologist in Iceland who does the interviews, and that's how they're organized. So I think it could be quite interesting to hear the differences in how what that means for her work. But she'll also be presenting some real concrete examples of how the therapeutic evaluation and follow-up is happening in Iceland. So please do join us. And now I pass it over to Childhood for the last word.
Thank you very much for your great presentation. It was really interesting and inspiring. And thank everybody for joining us today. Like Shona said, we look forward for seeing you next week. So it is May 23rd, and the webinar will start at 4 p.m. Central European Time. Also, you will see here 2 short evaluation forms. Please click it and give us feedback. It's really important for us. And also, if you want a certificate that regards that you were on this webinar today, please send us email. Katarina will write here email address in the chat box. So please send us email, and we will send a certification for you. So thank you very much, and have a nice day.